Good afternoon to everybody joining in. Lovely to see you here today. We're just going to start in a few minutes, just waiting to see who else is logging in today. But while we're waiting, let me just introduce myself a little bit. So, my name is Meagan Smith, and I will be crafting with you guys today. We're going to be making bracelets, right? Now, before we even go into the making, we're going to talk about just the basics of the different sort of beads and materials out there, what's best to use, what's not so good to use, and so on and so forth. So just wait a few minutes and then we'll begin today's broadcast. Of course, feel free to check out my business page, Meg's Jewelry Creations, on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Meg's Jewelry on Twitter. You can also check out the Anglican Outlook's Instagram, as well as their Facebook. Give them a like, give them a follow, as well as their YouTube page. Okay, I'm seeing 6 o'clock. Um, I think, are we ready to start it now? You ready to start? Okay, great. That is my yes. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Like I said, my name is Meagan Smith, and today we are going to be crafting. We're going to be making some bracelets. But like I said, before we begin with making the bracelets, we're just going to talk a little bit about the different materials and beads that you could use to incorporate within your bracelets, depending on what you're interested in, depending on what your if you're into glass or if you're into plastic or natural beads. We'll cover all of that today, right? So, bracelets. We know this basically being what we put on our hands. It could be stretch, it could be non stretch, it could be with a hook, it could be without a hook, right? Today, what we're going to do, we're going to make one stretch bracelet and we're going to make one non stretch bracelet, right? Now, I know I only asked for the materials to stretch, but at least you could just listen on to what is required for the non-stretch because it's a tad bit more complex than a stretch bracelet, right? So let's talk about materials. So for the materials that I asked for those who are tuning in, the best materials to get, we'll start with the beads first. Now I requested 8 millimeter size beads, and I'm sure a lot of people were a little bit confused as to what is meant by 8 millimeter, right? So beads are measured based on the diameter of a bead, right? We should know diameter is about the line that passes through a circle or a sphere and so on. So every single bead has a different diameter. 8 millimeter beads are usually about this size. I don't know if you guys could see it so clearly, but as you can see, it's pretty small. But that's about the average size of a bead for bracelets, right? There's also 10 millimeter, which is a tad bit bigger. Usually, men tend to wear bracelets with this size, right? But they're different sizes depending on the type of beads and so on. So you would have needed 8 millimeter beads, and there are different types of beads out there as well. So the ones I was showing you just now, these are actually what we call natural beads or semi-precious stones, and they're usually made up of certain stones like lava stone, tiger's eye, amethyst, etc., and so on. Right now, of course, I don't expect anybody to have gotten those type of beads because they are usually very expensive, right? Now, the other type of beads out there, we have glass beads, and there are different various shapes and sizes and colors of glass beads. I'm going to show you a popular one known as the rondelle. This is it here. As you can see, it has a little bit of sparkle towards it. And the good thing about this type of glass bead is actually not as um, breakable as the other type of glass beads. There are some glass beads like crackles where, just like its name, if you literally pelt it on the floor, it's going to break in half, right? So these are one of the strong types of beads. And then, of course, you have the ever so classic plastic beads. We have another name for this. It's not coming to me at this very moment, but these are usually beads made out of plastic. Unlike the glass beads, they, of course, would not break if you pelted. But after some time, depending on the type of plastic you use, they tend to melt or fade pretty easily, right? Or chip very easily, especially if they're made out of pearl, right? If it's a type of pearl type plastic. So those are just some of the type of beads. Of course, there's also wood beads and polymer clay beads and so on, but we wouldn't really get into that today, right? Okay, so of course, if you have any questions so far about what I'm talking about, the chat is there. If you comment, I would see all that you're mentioning, and I could answer your questions one time and so on, right? But for now, if it is that you're logging in, maybe a little shy or whatnot, you could just send a little hi so I could see who's logged on today, right? Okay. So now that we talked about the different types of beads, let's talk about string. So for the stretch bracelets, of course, it would be wise to use a stretch cord, right? Now, there are different types of stretch cord. I'm going to be using one called Korean black stretch cord. And this is the thickness of 1 millimeter, right? They're usually different thicknesses. There's 0.5, 0.8, which is the one I recommend you guys to get. 1.5, etc., right? And again, that just shows how thick the string is, or the diameter of the string thickness, right? Now, why I say zero point 0.8 and above is that when it says you use super thin string, it has a more susceptible chance of actually bursting. So unless you're double threading, which I'm not going to be covering today, then it doesn't make sense using such thin string, or unless the beads are small too, because some beads might be a bit too small to pass through such thick thread, so you would have to use a thinner thread, right? There are other types of string. There's another one, which is when this is you buy a bracelet, say in any big name jewelry store. I'm not going to call the name of the one we know here because, but if you go in stores like that, you'll realize that they use a very stretchy string, usually made out of fabric. But after about a week, it tends to wear out very easily. It tends to thread out really easily. Now, I don't like using that for the same reason, because when it threads out, it looks very unappealing, right? So I would prefer this they call it stretch nylon as well. This is a very good purchase to get, right? There's also a cloth stretch cord, but that smells after some time. So I wouldn't suggest that one either, right? So we have the beads, we have the cords. Um, we could talk about the um, tools for a little bit. Now, for a simple stretch bracelet, you don't really need any particular tool except one of them, and that is something to cut the string with. Now, I do something naughty and I use my cutting pliers to do that. You're not really supposed to do that because the pliers is mostly for cutting metal and so on. But I like to use these pliers because it actually cuts even closer to the nut without it bursting. Because the goal of making bracelets is to cut the thread as close to the nut as possible so that you don't see the residue of where you're tying, right? We try to keep the technique very decent here. So the only other time where you might probably need pliers for, or tools in general for making bracelets, is if you're making the non-stretch ones, which like I said we're going to do a little later, or if it says you want to say attach a charm on your bracelet. So this is one charm that I have here. It says love. I don't know if you guys could see it so well, but of course, if you wanted to attach this charm, you would have had to add in a few things so that it hangs like this. with using your pliers, right? But again, we're not really going to go into that detail right now, right? So now that we have our beads, we have our string, we have our charm, we're ready to bead, right? So making bracelets is pretty simplistic. Advice, first advice I would like to give. Now, a lot of things that people like to do, which is kind of a wasty kind of practice, is that instead they like to cut out how much string they want to use, right? Now, nothing's wrong with that. It's just that what happens, you need to have enough room to tie the bracelet. So sometimes you might cut too little or you cut too much and then you waste some of the string, right? So my best advice is when you're threading your bracelets, you thread it from the roll itself, right? So we're not going to cut the string. We're actually just going to use the one end of this string so that we can push our beads through and then we'll tie it, right? So just to repeat myself, you don't need to cut out the string of what you're using. You can just keep it on the roll for now until you're ready to tie it. Now, another thing that is very handy to have, which I put as an option for this broadcast, is measuring tape. Now, why measuring tape? Why not just use your own wrist, right? You see, if you use just your own wrist alone, sometimes you might measure a bit too, either too much or too little. Most of the time it's too little. So you won't want to use just string alone. It'll be better to use a measuring tape. Now, how do you measure your wrist correctly so that the bracelet fits correctly? And this is something that a lot of people have issues with. So, of course, you put the tape around your wrist. And when I do, notice it says 6.5. But I am not going to make that bracelet 6.5 inches. And here's why. When you put the tape on your wrist like that, you're assuming that the beads does not have like that sort of jump within the string, which will cause it to have some room and space for it to move around and so on, right? You don't want it too tight because the tighter the bracelet, the more susceptible it is to burst very quickly, right? So if it says you measure your wrist and it comes up to say 6.5 directly in such a position, what you would do, I usually add a half an inch more or a half an inch to an inch more so that I could accommodate for that room for my bracelet, right? So since my wrist measures 6.5, I'm gonna make the bracelet 7 inches. Yeah. Okay. So we have the string. We know the measurements we're working with now. What about pattern? Now, some people, when they're making bracelets, they like to accumulate what beads they want to use one time, right? Before they bead it. So let's say you decide, okay, I want to make a purple bracelet, right? So you would take out all the purple bracelets you need. You could probably just take out a handful. Nothing's wrong with taking out too much one time. You could always just put back what you don't need afterwards. And then when you're taking out the purple, maybe I'll put a little green within it, right? Because, I mean, green is a lovely color to use. So, took out some purple beads, take out some green. Okay, are I just going to be putting purple, green, purple, green? What pattern? Is it going to be 2 purples and a green, 2 greens and a purple? For this one, I'm putting 2 purples and a green, right? So if you want, now, usually for something like this, you could also use what is called a bead board. I don't have one right now, but it helps as well because some bead boards, they have the inches and so on already. So you could just lay out your beads there and they will tell you exactly how much beads you need to make a certain length of bracelet, whether it be 6, 7, 8 inches, right? So I'm just going to use my table for this, right? Another thing you could use, especially if it says you don't have a tablecloth on your table like mine and you're afraid the beads roll over, is to get one of those suede fabrics. You see the kind of suede fabric, I can't remember the actual name of it, but they usually sell it in Samaroos for like $3, $4. It's like one of those short suede cloths. You rest it on your table, the beads won't roll away because of the soft material, right? So that's another thing in which you could get so that you could make your bracelets without the beads rolling all over, right? So I'm just showing you example of people, making patterns before they make their bracelets. But I usually don't really do this much. But it really helps because then you would know, okay, well, I don't have enough beads to do this, so I have enough beads to do this. So, you know, it gives you an estimate on if it says you have enough to make what you're making. All right, so I'm just going to stop there because I basically have the pattern done, right? So if it is you're using a charm on your bracelet, my advice is to put the charm first. Now, another habit that people like to do is they like to put beads, then the charm, and then beads because in their head, they're thinking that the charm, that's the only way the charm will be in the center. But remember, bracelets are circle, and you have to tie the ends at the in the end of the bracelet. So, of course, it's going to be back together, right? Because it's a circle. So you could start with your charm first. And why I would recommend putting your charm first is because if you use a charm, you have a better chance of hiding the knot in the end than if it is you don't put it at the end, right? Because remember, the aim when we make bracelets, especially if we want to make them to sell, you don't want the person to see where you end off, right? You want to kind of hide it as much as possible so that the actual beauty of the bracelet shows. Yeah? Okay, so I added my charm first on my string. So now I'm going to add my beads. So whichever beads you have, you could feel free to add them in now. Just take your time. It's pretty simple. Just simply push the string through the bead and slide it across. And you continue just doing that until you reach your length. Now, what you could do is while you're beading, you could always check with your measuring tape or your bead board or your wrist, even if it says you don't have the measuring tape on you today, and just estimate how much bead you need left on your wrist, right? So if you're doing it the wrist way, okay, I strung some beads there. Simply take your wrist, estimate, okay, I still have a lot of beads to add left. Okay, no problem. And you continue threading. So if anyone else just logged in, just plug my pages and the Outlook pages again. My business page is Meg's Jewelry Creations. You could find me on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter as Meg's Jewelry Creations, right? Meg's Jewelry if it's Twitter. You can feel free to check out my items. I usually make stainless steel items or with natural stone items. I don't really use like plastic beads much, but if requested, I could create it. And I also do custom orders, so you could feel free to check me out. As well as feel free to check out the page in which I'm streaming on right now, the Anglican Outlook. They have a Facebook page, an Instagram page, and a YouTube page, right? So like their Facebook page, follow their Instagram, subscribe to their YouTube channel. Okay. So I've been beading for a while. I'm just going to put a few more beads and then I'm going to check, use the wrist method again. And then I'm going to use the tape measurement method to see if I reached my goal. So that was the last bead. So this is where I reach. As you can see, this is the pattern with the blue, with the green and purple beads. And there's my charm at the end. I'm just taking my wrist and it's perfect. It's not too tight. I can move around the bracelet. I'm resting it on the table. I'm taking my measuring tape to see how long this bracelet is. Exactly 7 inches. Perfect. So now that we have our beads and we have our charms, it's time to tie the bracelet so that, we could get it, right? Now, for tying, there are many different ways in which you could tie your bracelet to secure the knot, right? Personally, I like to go with the triple knot method. There's also the method of using craft glue to seal the knot a bit tighter. That's okay as well. The only thing with the craft glues is just be careful that you don't get any of the glue on the charm because sometimes it frosts it up, right? So you take a string. Of course, you want to have at least 2 inches of string on the side on which you were beading from. And well, of course, on the other side, you have ample string to work with, right? So you take one knot, and immediately after you take the first knot, you take the second knot one time. And you pull about that knot about 6 or 7 times just to secure it. Make sure it's tight enough. And then you go for the third knot to confirm it. And again, you pull on the string. And again, the reason why I say 0.8 millimeters and up is because it has a lesser chance of snapping when you pull to tighten the knot like such, right? If it was a 0.5 stretch, it would have snapped on my finger by now. Okay, so the knot is secured. So now we're going to cut the string, right? So I'm going to start with the part where I used to, so I'm going to start with this length here, the one that is not attached to the reel. And I'm going as close to the knot as possible. And that piece is gone. And then, again, close to the knot as possible. And here, again, if you have the charm, you could simply just slide it across. Voila, no knot, no knot. Or if you don't have a charm, you could also try fitting that knot into the bead so that you don't see it as well, right? And that is our beaded bracelet. Isn't it cute? So now we've made, sorry if I'm holding the bracelet a bit awkwardly because my phone is mirrored. It's showing a bit weird. So that's why I keep showing it the wrong way. But this is the stretch bracelet, which we would have made with our materials. I hope you guys could send pictures to the Anglican Outlook of the different bracelets that you made with this session. I can't wait to see it. Don't be shy. All bracelets are beautiful bracelets, right? Once it's created by you. Okay, so now that we've made our stretch bracelet, let's try with the non-stretch bracelet, right? So the only difference for the non-stretch bracelet is the type of string as well as the ending methods, right? So unlike the stretch method, we're not going to tie any knots. We're actually going to be clamping, right? So we're actually going to be using more tools for that. And this, you could do this as a second project, maybe in the future when you get more supplies. Another thing I forgot to mention, good places in which you could get supplies from. If it says that you're just starting off and you maybe want like a little starters kit and so on, you could check Bead Cafe. They are on Muckracker Road in St. James. You could check Beads Jaw if you're living in the East. They are on Green Street in Arima, right? And both of these pages have Facebooks and Instagram, so you could find out the exact locations, their contact, if they're doing TT Post delivery in these COVID times, etc., right? There's also an online store on Facebook called Craft Easy. If it says you want to make this a business and actually sell beaded products, you could check them out as well. And they have not only really great prices, but a wide variety of different tools and findings and beads, right? I actually got these pliers from Craft Easy. And I'm going to talk about them a little bit. Well, we talked about the cutting pliers already, so we won't really need to mention that one. This one is the round nose pliers. So this is the pliers that you use to bend your metals, right? In whatever shape, sizes, or forms. You could also use it as a guide to help seal things. The flat nose plier now, this one is mostly used to seal items, right? To close off links and so on and so forth. So you'll see exactly what I'm talking about when I say that, when we start this bracelet. So, like I said, for the non-stretch, we're using a different sort of cord, right? One that is not as stretchy. Now, there are different types of cord you could use for non-stretch. The most common one is clear nylon, but I don't particularly really like the clear nylon because I feel like they usually come in very thin diameters. And you know, the goal of making jewelry is for it to be as thick and sturdy as possible. My favorite type of cord to actually use for non-stretch is tiger tail wire, and it's really inexpensive. I think this roll was like $30 or $40, and I got about 100 meters on it, right? So you can invest in some tiger tail wire. It's really durable and affordable, right? So now that we have our wire, we could now begin to assemble what it is we're going to make, right? Now, what else would we need for a non-stretch? Now, unlike stretch where you just tie the ends, we have to have finishes, right? So this here, we have our bead finish, which it kind of looks like, I don't know if you guys could see it so clearly, but this is more or less what it looks like. It has a sort of circle on each side of it, and it looks like a ball below, right? So we're going to use two of those, one on each end of the bracelet. We're going to use what is called a lobster clasp. A lobster clasp is basically the hooks, right? Where it's able to open and close so that you could hook and unhook your bracelets. And the last thing we're going to need for these bracelets is something called a jump ring, right? And just like its name is literally a ring, right? A piece of metal used to link other things together, right? So you could also call it a bead link, but it's most commonly used as a jump ring. And this is what it looks like. It's very small, right? It's usually opened already. It have closed jump rings as well, but you don't really use that often. We tend to go for the open jump rings. And that's important to remember when it says you're shopping online too. Try and look for open jump rings. Because sometimes you might order the closed one and then you're wondering, well, how am I going to use this, you know? Okay, so one more thing we would need for our finishes. Now, I cannot remember the names of these. I think they're called bead tips. But these are very, very small metal beads. And what we usually do with those is that we use the flat nose pliers to tighten it so that the string doesn't get loose. Again, I will explain this when we make our bracelet, right? Because like I said, it's very complex compared to a stretch bracelet where you simply thread the beads, tie a knot, and go about your day, right? But there are cases in which somebody might want a non-stretch bracelet and you would need to know what to do. So first thing first, we have our cord here. Now, this is something what I like to do. Some people might not do it, but it's a very simple practice. So what I do is I put my bead tip first, and then one of my bead ends, right, onto my cord, right? And it's the same thing like what we do for the stretch bracelet, where instead of cutting out how much cord we want, we are using the roll. Yeah? So I thread that in, right? Then once I thread that in, I could then begin my beading, whatever pattern I want. Now this one is going to be a random colored one. So we'll just string in some beads. Now the other difference between a stretch and a non-stretch. Remember when we said for the stretch, it doesn't matter where you put your charm. You could put it wherever you want. It must meet back in a circle. For this one, it's not the same thing. You have, if you're adding a charm, you have to add some beads first, then the charm, and then some more beads, right? And another practice you could do to help this out is if it says you know the measurements in which you're working with, you could use that as a guide so that you can know where to put your charm. So let me give an example of that. Let's say a customer asks you to make a bracelet and they want the bracelet to be 6 inches, right? So what you could do is you minus 1 inch to accommodate for the end bits and the lobster clasp and so on, right? Or maybe half an inch, depending on what type of hooks you use. And so you're left with 5 inches now. So you bead 2.5 inches of beads, you add your charm, and then you add 2.5 inches of more beads. And of course, you add your ends afterwards, right? We're not going to add charm on this bracelet. So we're just going to bead it until it's about 6 inches. So I'm just being very wild with the colors here. This isn't going to have any scheme like the last one. It's just going to be pure vibes. And you could do this sometimes. You don't necessarily have to make a total pattern bracelet. You can make a random one with whatever beads you want. Doesn't matter. As long as it looks appealing to you or to your customer or to whoever else you're making it, friend or family. So I shred out some beads here. So I'm going to use my tape measurement to see how long I made it. And it's about exactly 6 inches. Great. So now that I add in how much beads I desire for this bracelet, I'm going to now add the other side of my end, right? And then I'm going to add my bead tip. So here's where things get crazy. So when you add your bead tip, a nice thing which you could do is just bend the tip of the string that you're using, bend it in half, and then pass the bead tip through it again. Now I said it's very complex because it's not something you can really see too well, but it should look something like this, where you pass the bead tip through the string twice to make a sort of a loop. Now, once you do that, you just simply use your flat nose plier to press down on that tip so that it looks something like this. So that way the string, it can't move. It's unable to move, right? Now, why it says we use bead tips for these is because if it says we use regular string, well, we just put the string regularly through this. The string, of course, is going to just pass through the hole in the bead end, right? So the tips prevent the string from letting go. So it ensures that the bracelet stays intact at all times, right? So let me just fix this a little bit because, right. So now that the string, one end of it, has the tip and the ends, you're going to carefully take your pliers, your flat nose, and use, or you could just use your hands too because this part is relatively easy. And you're just going to close the bead end like such, right? You can use the top of the pliers, the top of the end to secure it a little bit like this. So it should look like this now. Oh, it slip out a little bit. Yeah, so it should look like this now. So one end of it is closed. And what I like to do one time is add my jump ring or my lobster clasp. I'm going to add the lobster clasp on this end. Oh, I'm doing it the real wild way, but to close your jump rings, you can use both pliers. You can use this to seal it and this to kind of guide you with sealing. So it's closed now, so we're good. So now that one end is perfectly finished. So this is what that one ends look like. You have your hook, you have your bead end, your tip is securing so that the beads don't fall out. So now you have your other side. Now the other side, you could do two things with this. You could either cut off a little piece of string and do the same loop as the other one, or you could truss your string and just seal the tip one time, right? I'm going to do the latter. I'm going to truss it. So I come down on my tip here and it's sealed. So it should be able to be secure there. And what I do now is I cut excess string, put that back on my rope. And then just like before, I'm gently closing my bead end with my fingers and my pliers. And there you have it. The other side is secure as well. So on this side now, I'm going to add my jump ring. Careful. I keep using my fingers when I know I'm supposed to be using my pliers. Right, and that is secured now. So now we've made a non-beaded bracelet, right? So this one will be one that we use to hook with, like such. Yeah? Now, I'm not going to, well, I'm going to try embarrassing myself and see if it's going to hook because I'm terrible with putting on hook bracelets. For somebody who make jewelry for nearly 11 years, you think I'll be able to master it, right? It has several ways in which you could do this. I've seen some people do it with a paper clip, but I'm not gonna try it. But basically, you could be able to hook it like such, and it should be able to hang very well. I made those exact, so I guess I should have went a little bit extra with it, but that's okay. That's okay. This was just a little demo for you. So we've made our beaded and we've made our non-beaded bracelets. So now you know how to make both types of bracelets. Now there are other types of bracelets out there. We have the macrame, which we could do in another session. And it could do the multiple stranded bracelets with metal. We could do wire bracelets. There's so other many types. But we started off with the basic beaded ones, the stretch and non-stretch. Maybe some other time we could do those other types of bracelets. So that is about it. Do you guys have any questions, thoughts, concerns, queries about today's bead session? Anything you'd like to ask me? Oh, I'm now seeing the comments. I see Jody says hi, JL says hi, Yvonne and Diane put up prayer hands. Wasi says hi. Thanks so much for logging in and listening. Oh, thank you so much, Ermin. Yes, I hope I pronounced that name correctly. Nikisha is sending some love, right? I'm now actually getting a chance to look at the comments. So, of course, if you have any questions, thoughts, concerns about what I've talked about today, about the materials that I use, any questions at all before we conclude? I see Unique says thank you. Cavell says thank you. No problem, no problem. Okay, well, that's if there's no questions. Well, thank you so much. Oh, okay. So Jody asks, can you repeat the name of the stores to buy the materials? Okay, so if you're living in the West, there's a store on Muckrapo Road. I believe it's right after the complex where what's this pizza place name, boy? Papa John's. Right after Papa John's, there's a building, a blue building called Bead Cafe, right? And you could get some of the materials there, like the beads and the stretch cords, the tiger tail, etc. Right? If you're in the east, say it is you're traveling and you just come off the maxi and you keep walking a little bit. On your left hand side, the next corner on your left is Green Street. And if you walk a little bit, you'll see a store called Beads Joe. It's a green building the last time I went. You could check out these stores on Facebook or Instagram as well, and they usually have your the information on how to get there and so on. And I think both stores are doing TT Post delivery right now, so there's that option if it is you're unable to access them. There's also Craft Easy. They are strictly online on Facebook. They have a wide variety of stuff. And those are more popular for persons who really want to make beading like a future hobby because they have a minimum order of 200, right? So you could feel free to check out that store as well. They sell all different types of beads and materials and starting kits and so on, right? So feel free to check out any of those stores. Um, I've seen a question. Will there be any other sessions? Yes, I would like to have more sessions very soon. Of course, I will let you guys know when I'm doing them. Most likely, I'll be doing them with the Anglican Outlook. And just to plug them again, feel free to follow them on Facebook and Instagram, as well as YouTube, so that you could check out other events coming up because they usually have a lot of events coming up. Oh, I see Miss Phaedra is here. Hi, Meg. Good to see you. Do you have any Anglican rosaries? I don't have any ready made on me right now, but I will be doing some pretty soon for the month of August. I just need to get like the crosses and the beads. But once I do get them, I will be making some. And I actually want to have a session on making Anglican rosaries soon. So once I get them, I will let you guys know when that session will be. Most likely it will be later this year, closer to Christmas, so that you guys could make some nice rosaries for your friends. Um, for those who created during the session, please use the hashtag makingjewellerywithmegs so that we could see your different work, right? And you could feel free to tag me on Instagram as well, or Twitter, or TikTok, or Facebook, Meg's Jewelry Creations, so that I could see it as well and I could repost and so on, right? Okay. Is the technique for the rosaries like the bracelets? Um, Depends on the type of rosaries you're making. If it's a stretch bracelet, it tends to be slightly similar. Non-stretch is a whole other different technique depending on the type you're making. It have ones that I use hooks for, ones I don't use hooks for. I use the same stretch method for the non-stretch. That's why I say I had to have a whole session on that because it's a little bit more complex than just beading bracelets. When is the next class? I'm not too sure right now. Might have one maybe in September or October. I will let you guys know. Or the Anglican Outlook will let you guys know, right? Um, any other questions before we close off? Oh, thanks so much for the love, Glenda and JL and Jody. Thanks for the love, Miss Grace, Miss Phaedra. All right, so if there are no other questions, thank you guys so much for tuning in today's session. I hope you guys learned a lot with the different types of bracelets for both stretch and non-stretch. I cannot wait to see the creations you guys come up with. And I hope you guys once again go and check out Anglican Outlook. Like I said, they're always having cool events out there. Feel free to check them out, give a little support, and I hope to see you guys again very soon. Oh, nice seeing you. Oh, thank you so much, Nikisha. And I saw your message. So, with that being said, I hope you guys have a blessed night. Take care, be safe, and God bless. Take care, everybody.